We all know the Space Marines, big, power-armored maniacs who wield rapid-fire rocket-propelled grenade launchers. But how well do you know the themes and motifs behind a Marine? Why Marines are the way the creators of the setting made them? What were they inspired by? Some of you may have immediately thought of Robert A. Heinlein's Starship Troopers, the book, not the movie. Though that movie is excellent and probably the closest thing we'll ever get to a Guardsman vs. Tyranids film. However, Rick Priestley, one of Warhammer's original creators, listed several inspirations for Warhammer 40k, and there's actually a much closer match: Dune. Rogue Trader-era Space Marines are almost one-to-one copies of the Sardaukar, and when you look at early Marines, the resemblance is clear. Of course, their inspiration draws from more than just that being fantasy elements. Warhammer 40k at a glance is just Warhammer Fantasy in space, and we don't mean Age of Sigmar, we mean Warhammer Fantasy Battles, the old world, the setting the Total War games are based in. Some of this is obvious, simply looking at the Greenskins and Orcs, or the Eldar and the High Elves. This was done as essentially a way to cut production costs. The plan was you make an Orc who you can give either a gun or a spear to. The gun for 40k and the spear for fantasy. So what were the Marines derived from? Well, unlike the other races or factions in 40k, the Space Marines were designed from the ground up for the game. In an interview with Bob Naismith, the original sculptor of the first Space Marines, he revealed his inspirations were far more rooted in US D-Day troops, combined with a Roman soldier. Along with, of course, Rick Priestley's early lore, all those elements are certainly there when you look at early Marines. The Roman elements have even magnified in modern designs. Yet even Bob Naismith will be the first one to say the designs of Space Marines have changed and moved on from his and Rick Priestley's initial ideas. We can identify the core aesthetic that Space Marines have followed in their progress. That being, we think Space Marines at their core are Space Knights, or to put it with a little more nuance, chivalric heroes in space. We can all see the aesthetic similarities that make a Space Marine a knight in space. Big, heavy armor, swords, shields, and even the occasional tabard. Hell, even the classic beaky helm looks an awful lot like a hound skull helm. Though with stuff like space wolves and white scars, that becomes a lot harder to see. Yet, there's still knights there, thematically speaking. So what do we mean by thematically a knight? Well, we're talking about the idea of the hero monomyth. We're sure you're familiar with the hero's journey, but there's actually another part to the hero with 1,000 faces. Archetypes. Archetypes are basically like molds for a hero. Think of Superman. He's an archetype for a hero called a paragon. There's plenty of other Superman-like characters in media, such as All Might. They're not identical to Superman, but they're cut from the same cloth. Marines fit really well into the idea of a chivalric hero archetype. A chivalric hero, broadly, is a hero who upholds virtues and uses technology to enhance themselves. A classic knight uses steel armor and tools. He is using technology to enhance himself. Batman isn't called the Dark Knight for nothing. Chivalric heroes are gadgeteers. I know it's weird to think of, but using tech to cover for your own weaknesses is a core part of being a knight. Everything that makes Marines so strong and so powerful comes from the arcane technologies of the Imperium. Probably the most important part of the chivalric hero archetype is virtues. A knight must be brave, just, and dutiful. Virtues are essentially an ideal that we hold ourselves to. Space Marines have their own virtues, though as they stem from the Imperium, they're a little twisted. Think about all of the litanies they have. Suffering not the alien to live is a Marine's virtue. It is an ideal they strive for. Though if we boil down a lot of the ideals Marines stand for, they're just hate, hatred, honor, and duty. Arguably the three core virtues a Space Marine holds himself to. Virtues that chapters you might not think as knightly, like the Space Wolves and the White Scars, do hold themselves to. Though just because a hero is virtuous doesn't mean they're chivalric. They need that technological component as well as another aspect. Faith. Faith could be argued to be a virtue, but it's such a core part of chivalric literature that we feel it needs to be placed into its own category. Marines, even those that don't worship the God Emperor, are faithful. Let's cover the obvious. Space Marines are warrior monks. They live in monasteries. Swathes of chapters worship the God Emperor of mankind, and those that don't see him as a god definitely do venerate him akin to one. Hell, even before the Horus Heresy, Marines referred to him as the Emperor of Mankind, beloved by all. Now there's a lot we can already pull from here because several orders of real-world knights were monastic like Marines are. The Knights Hospitaller, the Knights Templar, and the Knights of Malta were all monastic knightly orders. Their members lived like monks and fought like knights, just as Marines do, to the point where whole chapters are effectively just these real-world knights, such as the Black Templars chapter and the Guardians of the Covenant chapter. Template chapters that loads and loads of other Space Marine forces take inspiration from. And for those that don't worship the Emperor, where does their faith come from? How are they faithful? Well, it's usually a philosophy, a particular creed of their chapter. Maybe they believe purely in the primacy of man. Yet in their actions, they're still faithful. They still perform rituals and rites that, while not religious, are driven by faith. At a simple level, faith is simply believing in something you can't prove. At a more metaphysical level, it's a fire that can sustain humans through the worst of times. A thing Space Marines are constantly faced with. Astartes stand at the darkest precipices for humanity and declare that they can defeat the darkness. That the darkness is merely the passing of night, and that they will bring about the dawn. They can't prove this. In fact, they're often supremely arrogant when they declare this, yet they still believe it. They may not pray to any god, but they are faithful warriors all the same. It's zeal that fills their hearts in battle, not cold calculus. Even the Iron Hands, who pride themselves on being meticulous and logical, have that fire burning within them. What all this culminates in is that the chivalric hero-like Marines are a sort of collectivist hero. There's an old apocryphal story about the invention of sumo wrestlers. It was said that in feudal Japan, a village would pool all their food together and give it to the strongest, biggest man in the village, thus creating a sumo. It would be on the sumo to defend the village from bandits. That is a chivalric hero. It takes the collective effort of a village to supply a knight, just like it takes the Imperium to supply the Space Marines. Just like Marines sacrifice their humanity to defend the Imperium in turn, to defend their village. So must a chivalric hero put themselves aside for the collective that supports them? We see this a lot in various Space Marine books, but chiefly in the Salamanders omnibus. The Salamanders have sacrificed more than most Marines for their demigod-like powers. They become physically monstrous to defend humanity. We'd even posit that the Salamanders are so much more humanitarian than other Astartes, because they're so removed from humanity by their appearance, their skin becoming rocky coal black, and their eyes glowing a fiery red. A Marine from another chapter even once thought that the Salamanders were mutated by chaos when he laid eyes upon them for the first time, instinctively moving his hand to his bolter. A classic case of the outsider seeing the most of the game. That kind of self-sacrifice is what being a chivalric hero is all about. Think about how many Arthurian stories end up with the knight sacrificing himself in the end. The tale of the Green Knight is a great example of this. For those who don't know the story of the Green Knight, one day King Arthur is having a feast, when in bursts a giant green knight. He challenges the bravest knight to cut off his head, and he will do the same to them after. Sir Gawain agrees and hacks off the Green Knight's head. Much to everyone's surprise, the Green Knight then picks up his head and plops it back on his shoulders. Sir Gawain then journeys to the Green Knight's home, and a week later is kneeling before the Green Knight, about to have his head chopped off. The Green Knight spares Gawain, but he was ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. In some versions of the story, Gawain takes up the Green Knight's challenge to protect the honor of Camelot. Others because the Green Knight will kill them all if he doesn't. Either way, he takes the challenge because he is virtuous. Many times in 40k, we see an Astartes do the same, marching forward, chainswords drawn, taking up a challenge to protect their honor or the people of the Imperium. A Space Marine is at their core a chivalric hero because they're virtuous. Yes, twisted hateful virtues around slaying the Xenos, but no one said virtues have to be good. They compensate for their innate weakness with technologies. Yes, far more complex tech than plate armor and a longsword, but it's all to turn a man into a walking tank. They're faithful, whether it is their faith in the God Emperor of mankind, or that their creed and skill will see them through their darkest hour. When it comes to Space Marines, fans can often get hung up on aesthetics and visuals. You might be looking at the Space Wolves or the White Scars or even Phobos Marines, and are going, are those really Space Knights? Well, aesthetically no. But thematically, still yes. They might not look like Space Knights like the Black Templars or the Dark Angels do, but they have the soul of a knight. They're still chivalric heroes regardless of what they wear. Remember, the ancient sumo also fills the chivalric archetype, and he is no knight. I do want to address Space Wolves in particular though, because, well, that's where this does break down a little thematically. Space Wolves are savage, animalistic warriors, and it wouldn't be weird to turn your nose up at the notion of them being called gadgeteers. You're right, Space Wolves are one of the least knightly chapters of Space Marines, yet that seems deliberate. The Space Wolves are a chapter built on hypocrisy, contradiction, and false faces. Even their name has two sides to it. To the wider Imperium, they're the Space Wolves, and yet amongst their own kind they refer to themselves as the Volca Fenrica. This is representative for how the Wolves present themselves to the Imperium at large, proudly screaming, "We are dumb brutes," while in reality, with those they trust, they reveal very hidden depths. Those hidden depths are their knightly virtues. It's their chivalric nature that deep down past all the pelts, runes, and tribal markings, the Volca Fenrica stand for the helpless. We'd ask you to remember the Months of Shame here. For those who don't know, the Months of Shame was a conflict between the Space Wolves and the Inquisition's Ordo Malleus. For after the First War of Armageddon, the Inquisition deemed the Guard forces who had fought in it to be irretrievably tainted, ordering their immediate purging. The Space Wolves literally acted as their shield, blocking the Inquisition's guns. What is more befitting of a chivalric hero than standing in defense of the innocent against all odds? To tie everything with the Space Wolves back to chivalric heroes and archetypes, it's best to think of them as cursed knights. They are werewolves after all. Dealing with the beast versus the man is a core part of werewolf stories. The Space Wolves are dealing with a very similar conflict, that of rectifying a Marine's inherently chivalric nature with the bestial nature of their gene seed curse. Hence why they have all these inherent contradictions to being chivalric heroes. Though under it all, through all their false faces, their actions are that of knights. So it's rather fitting that the Space Wolves have always held actions far above words. Though perhaps one of the most compelling ways we can demonstrate that Marines are chivalric heroes is by their enemies. Chivalric heroes are warriors of civilization. You can't have a village without society, so what's the opposite? An individual who rejects society and derives power from their isolation. That of course being the barbarian hero. The opposite of the chivalric hero in many ways. Barbarian heroes don't need armor. They rely on raw muscles and might, shun others and seek to tame the world to their base desires with their own two hands. Think of Conan the Barbarian, probably the best known barbarian hero. Conan is a ruthlessly ambitious and wild character. There's an immediate faction that comes to mind when you look at Conan: the World Eaters. Visually speaking, look at them busting out of their armor with rippling muscularity, a symbolic rejection of their once sacred duty, shedding the technology, shedding their chivalric duty to embrace barbarism. Think how selfish World Eaters are. They give in to their base desire for slaughter. Their brotherhood is all but gone. They're a rabble of power-hungry berserkers, here to see nothing more than civilization burn so that they gain more gifts from Khorne. This is true of nearly any of the Chaos factions. They sacrifice their chivalric duty to become barbaric. The Death Guard's armor gets replaced with bloated, rotted flesh. The Emperor's children often arrogantly discard it, exposing their perfect bodies. The Thousand Sons simply profane their armor, turning it from the technological to the magical. Chaos Space Marines are the Astartes' dark reflection. Is there truly any better way of defining where light is than by looking for the shadows? So when you compare these two, when you see an Ultramarine and a Khorne Berserker cross blades, what do you see? I see a knight and a barbarian, locked in battle, civilization versus raw power lust. I hope this video has made you take a look at Space Marines through a slightly different lens. While a lot of people just want to enjoy the raw, over-the-top fun of Warhammer 40k as a setting, which is fine, enjoy the universe however you like, I just wanted to show you another angle to view 40k through, that of its themes, its inspirations, and its deeper ideas. That just like all works of fiction, there's a long line of inspirations and motifs that we as people have passed around the campfire since we were hairy apes. Chivalric heroes have been around since roughly the 13th century, with Space Marines being just another chapter in that long legacy. Behind every paragraph and reference in these videos, there's a mountain of research, editing, and more than a few burnt-out cogitators. That's where our patrons come in, with multiple tiers offering a variety of things, from exclusive chats in our Discord to personalized artwork created for our individual patrons. Every subscription keeps the machine spirit of the Astartes Anonymous YouTube channel appeased. And for our top-tier patrons, a display on the Wall of Honor at the end of each podcast. So if you're enjoying the content, please do consider taking a quick look at our Patreon. Thanks so much for watching.